Listen, if you have a Bible, hopefully everybody's got a Bible now. Let's open up to Joshua chapter 7. And we will be covering chapter 7. It's good to be back in the high school room because last Sunday, we were in the sanctuary. And that was a bit last minute. So that's why we didn't announce it ahead of time. He just showed up that morning going, hey, man, where's everybody at? High school room is closed. And but we had a good time in there. But now we're back in here. It's always good to be back at home. And Joshua chapter 7 is where we are at today. And we will be covering the entire chapter. And I will show you how this is broken down for those of you that like to take notes. Even if you don't like to take notes, I guess, you still see how it's broken down. The first verse, these are the three main divisions. And the first main division is just verse 1 by itself. We see disobedience there. The second main division is defeat in verses 2 to 9. And then these sections grow larger as we go because the third and final section, which is death, is verses 10 to 26. And so we will take a look at all of this. Before I forget, because I always forget this, there is a meeting today, an interest meeting for the Christmas choir. I know that's coming up already. And you may be thinking, Christmas choir, man, that's for little kids. But they need some old people in there too. So they're inviting you. You didn't know that you were old, huh? But you figure if there's like little first and second graders, you're like elderly to them. How many of you have been in the Christmas choir in the past? Any of you been in the Christmas choir? Good. A few of you have. Okay, very good. Yeah, so they're looking for junior high and high school and even some young adults. So that's today at 1 o'clock up in the main building upstairs in what's called the loft, okay? But we are in Joshua chapter 7. We'll be looking at all of this here as we get into the first section. I do not watch a lot of other sports. I guess with the Olympics going on right now, I've been watching a lot of sports. Running and judo and fencing and some of the ones that I've been watching. But generally speaking, I only watch soccer. And I can tell you that in soccer there is after your team scores on someone, there's this period of about 10 or 15 minutes after you score on the other team when you are oftentimes most susceptible to being scored on. You can watch a game and oftentimes that will happen. You'll see a team score and it's like, all right, good. And then they'll immediately get scored on by the other team. It's funny how often that happens, but it is an actual normal part of soccer, and coaches oftentimes will tell you like, all right, next 10 minutes, go hard. Because what happens, or at least my theory, and of course my theory is right, is that when your team has scored on someone, you get confident, you get cocky, and oftentimes let your guard down. And the other team is then able to slide in there and score on your team due to your self-confidence. Well, we're going to see that that's what happened to the children of Israel here in Joshua chapter 7, because for the first time in this book, starting from Joshua chapter 1, we've covered every chapter since, this is the first time that they've experienced trouble. And we'll find out why that is, and I believe it's due to self-confidence. But we start with our first section, which is disobedience. And as you can see, it's verse 1 and just verse 1, but there's a lot going on. Let's start reading in verse 1. But the children of Israel committed a trespass regarding the accursed things. For Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took of the accursed things. So the anger of the Lord burned against the children of Israel. Now, we'll break this down just a little bit and move through it. But the first thing that I've got three subpoints here. And the first is that this deals with Achan. However, a man named Achan. However, notice at the beginning of verse 1, but the children of Israel committed a trespass. Now, the children of Israel, even though it was Achan, as we will find out, God considers the people to all be one. They're unified. They're a unit. Some of you have been with us here on Wednesday nights, and we've been going through Ephesians, and you've learned the same thing about us as Christians. that God sees us as one body. We're one unit. Yes, there are many different members. There's lots of different people in here. However, we are, in the Lord's eyes, we are a collective or a unit. We're unified. Well, it was no different for these people, the children of God, or the children of Israel, they're called here. And here they are all guilty of committing a trespass. Everybody knows what a trespass is. You've seen trespass signs, no trespassing. If you go beyond that sign, that's trespassing. You've broken the laws or you've broken the rule. Okay, so they've broken the rules here. We'll find out what it was that happened. But it says that they trespassed regarding the accursed things. What accursed things are we talking about? We'll see that in a moment. But first we have Achan, for Achan the son of Carmi, son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah of the tribe of Judah. Now, let me just mention something, and I'll mention it a couple more times as we go through, or something similar to this. You'll notice that it says Achan the son of Carmi, of Zabdi, Zerah, the tribe of Judah. Why so specific? Well, because it was very possible that there was more than one Achan. And so they're making it clear, the writer's making it clear that, no, it wasn't that Achan or that Achan, it was this Achan, and he came from this family and from this tribe. But one of the, well, you know what, I'll mention it again later on in regards to something slightly different. But we've got this Achan, okay, it's from the tribe of Judah. And it says that he took of the accursed things. Now, what are the accursed things? It's interesting that the word for accursed is the word herem, H-E-R-E-M, herem. And it actually is translated, or it can be translated, devoted things. And so we might go, well, which is it? Is it accursed things? Because accursed things and devoted things, there's a big difference between the two. Is it accursed or is it devoted? And what are we talking about here? Now, accursed, we can probably, because of that word curse that's in there in the middle, we probably can figure out that, okay, this is not good. It's not good to get something that's accursed. But devoted, what does that mean? Devoted, generally speaking, we take that to have a good connotation, a good meaning. Something that's devoted, we go, okay, if you're devoted to someone, that's a good thing. You're loyal to them. If you're devoted to a team, you might have a specific team that you're devoted to, and that's your loyalty. What does this mean here? Well, you obviously you've got your Bibles. You're in Joshua chapter 7. Just go back to Joshua chapter 6. Let me show you a couple of verses as we build our case here. In Joshua chapter 6, at verse 18, and we'll look at just verse 18 and 19 real quickly, so that we understand what this accursed things was, and what this devoted thing was, and what is this herem anyways. It says in Joshua 6, verse 18, and you, by all means, abstain from the accursed things, lest you become accursed when you take of the accursed things and make the camp of Israel a curse and trouble it. So it's very clear. They're accursed, and you're going to make the camp of Israel a curse, and you're going to trouble the camp of Israel. Okay? Now, what are those things? We'll get to that in just a minute. But you understand that they were supposed to go hands off on these things. These are verse 18 of Joshua chapter 6. These are specific instructions from Joshua as the people were about to rush into Jericho. Jericho had been destroyed. He's telling all the people, all right, rush in, destroy everybody that's inside there. But he gives them this instruction: do not take of any of the accursed things. Do not. It was very clear. Now in verse 19, we learn what the accursed things are. But all the silver and gold, vessels of bronze and iron. So this works really good if you open it. But all the silver and gold and vessels of bronze and iron, in other words, all of the precious metals, are consecrated or set apart or dedicated to the Lord. They shall come into the treasury of the Lord. So we find out what the problem here is, and that is that Achan has taken of the accursed things. It could have been gold, silver and gold. It could have been bronze or iron, whatever it was. We'll find out what it is as we get into the chapter, but he took those things. But the other part of the problem, not just the fact that he was told not to, but I want you to notice in Joshua 6:19, those things are consecrated to the Lord. So that's where the devotion part comes in. That word herem means accursed, but also devoted. It was accursed because he was told not to take those things, but it was also devoted because he wasn't supposed to take those things, because those things were supposed to be given to the Lord, dedicated to the Lord. And the metals would be processed and used in a future way for the tabernacle or the temple of God. And so they weren't supposed to take these things. Why were they not supposed to take these things from Jericho? Now, as it goes on, the story goes on, you'll find that there are times when they could take things, but why not this time? Well, it's what we might call the first fruits or the first things. In other words, our best or the first is to be dedicated to the Lord. Whatever we have should really be dedicated to the Lord, and really the best of what we have should be given to the Lord. We shouldn't be seeking to just give him our leftovers, okay? Not just the leftovers. I've got 24 hours in a day, and oftentimes I find myself giving him the last few moments of my time while I'm laying in bed, about to knock out, and then I remember, I haven't prayed or read. Well, I'll read tomorrow. Let me just pray. Father, that's it. And I find myself giving him just my leftovers. I can find myself throughout the day spending time on eating or brushing my hair or hanging out with friends or gaming or watching YouTube or learning new TikTok dances. I can spend so much of my time doing so many other things and then leave God some crumbs at the end of it. And so this is a principle here that we're learning in Joshua, that the first things, you got to dedicate those to God. Give that to God, the best that you have. Give that to God. So this man Achan took those things. He wasn't supposed to, but he also wasn't supposed to because those were supposed to be the Lord's. And so we find here Achan, we find, I've got some other subpoints here, the accursed things. Okay, and then finally it says in the end of verse 1, so the anger of the Lord burned against the children of Israel. So we see Achan, we see the accursed things, and we see the anger of the Lord burning against his own people because of this. Now, we move on to the second main division, which is defeat. And as you can see, I've already put spies sent. That's what we see in verse 2. Okay, we're going to see defeat here. But let's look at verse 2. Now Joshua sent men from Jericho to, you recognize that as Ai, right? Everybody's familiar with Ai. You all know Ai, what Ai is. Many of you have probably gotten Ai to do your homework for you and write reports for you. And teachers are telling you, hey, don't be using AI. And now they're coming up with new technology to stop you from turning in reports that are made, by AI or whatever. But this, however, is not the same AI. This is a city. And the city is actually pronounced I, as in I. I can't believe you used AI to do your report. So I. Now, for the rest of your life, you will hear Bible teachers call it AI, and that's okay, but you and I will understand it's actually pronounced I. And so it says that Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai. Now, what does that indicate for us? It indicates this, that there is no break between Joshua 6 and 7. In Joshua chapter 6, Jericho was defeated. Jericho was defeated by God, not by the people, by God. It just continues on. Right after they get done with that, Joshua goes, hey, where's the next city? The next city is Ai. Let me send some spies. And he sends spies. It's important that you remember that. Stick that in your mind, that Joshua sent spies right after Jericho. I'll tell you why, of course, in a little bit, but let's continue on with the story. Now, Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, we're in verse 2, which is beside Beth-aven, on the east side of Bethel, and spoke to them, saying, go up and spy out the country. So the men went up and spied out Ai. Now, we'll get to the spying in just a minute, but let me mention something else that I mentioned from verse 1. Remember, we talked about the writer being very specific about the names, so that you could trace back and know exactly who it was that committed the crime. Well, this is, there's a point of contention that some people have with the Bible. They don't like the Bible. They're critics of the Bible. One of the arguments that they bring against the Bible is that it's not real. It's not reliable. Well, one of the arguments that we have in what we call apologetics, that doesn't mean apologizing for anything. It means that you're putting up a defense. When you are defending the reliability of the Bible, one of the tools that we use is geological or geographical sites or locations. There are some religious books that have been written that when you open them up, they mention names and places that are fantasy. And you go, what is this? There's no place like this. None of those places has ever been discovered or excavated. And that's an indicator that that book is false. They came up with all these pretend lands. It's fairy tale. Well, one of the things that is unique to the Bible is that it's filled with geographical locations and references. Therefore, you and I, we have a way of proving, this is one of the proofs that the Bible is reliable when we come to Joshua chapter 7 and we go, hey, it's mentioning Jericho, and which, by the way, Jericho's already been discovered. In fact, 2 Jerichos have been discovered. Okay, that's a little bit of trivia that you can investigate that by yourself if you want. But Jericho and Ai, but then there's also Beth Aven on the east side of Bethel. So all of these geographical locations are good for you and I because we can go back and research those, and we can look at those. And many of these places have been discovered already and excavated, and they're finding societies and different things. And those are all proofs that what the Bible is saying is absolutely accurate. Anyhow, notice that the spies are sent. Go up and spy out the country. So the men went up and spied out Ai. In verses 3 and 4, we read this: And they returned to Joshua and said to him, Do not let all the people go up, but let about 2,000 or 3,000 men go up and attack Ai. Do not weary all the people there, for the people of Ai are few. So, in verse 4, about 3,000 men went up from the people, but they fled before the men of Ai. Now, this is much, much different. We'll find out some more details here in just a moment, but let me just remind you, and especially if you were not here last week and joined us in the sanctuary, in Joshua chapter 6, we saw that Jericho was completely destroyed. God knocked down the walls, and then the people went in, and they eliminated everybody that was inside of the city. And it was really, we call it the Battle of Jericho, but it actually was not a battle. It was God gave them the victory, and it was over. Well, here you will notice that they go and they attack Ai. They've got 3,000 men, but something very different happened at the end of verse 4. But they fled before the men of Ai. In other words, they ran away from the men of Ai. Now, we'll find out in the next section here in just a moment that 36 men died. But in verses 3 and 4, what we see here, if you're a note taker, is that we see some self-confidence here. We thus go back to my illustration, my opening illustration from soccer, the world of soccer. And that is that oftentimes right after a victory is our time or our moment when we are most susceptible to being scored on. We score on somebody, we're filled with self-confidence, we overestimate our abilities, we underestimate the other team's abilities, and then we give way to them scoring on us. But it is not any different in the spiritual world in our walk with the Lord. Some of you can attest to this. You've been to camp, you've been to summer camp, or you've been to winter camp with us. And you can get what's called it's referred to as a camp high. And you go to camp, man, you just like you're worshiping, you're studying the Bible, small groups, prayer, worship, Bible study, prayer, worship, Bible study, prayer. You're with Christians all weekend or however the length of the camp is. And then you come back down only to find out that Satan is waiting for you back at home, right? Telling you, clean your room. And then you just get so bummed out. Oh, get behind me, Satan. I've been at camp all weekend, and I don't have time for such foolishness as dirty laundry. And we oftentimes blow it, man. I see it all the time. And if you've been to camp with me, you know that one of the last things I tell you before we leave camp and go back home is, hey, Satan's waiting for you. Now, I'm not talking about mom or dad, but Satan's waiting down there to trip you up, mess you up. And I've seen so many students over the year, man, camp high, as soon as they get back down. They hit a low, down bad. What happens is we get on this camp high, and then we are susceptible. We forget that there's an enemy. We forget that there's a devil that wants to kill, steal, and destroy. And so something comes at us as soon as we get home, and we immediately give up our joy. We don't lose our joy, by the way. I never lose my joy. If I lost my joy, it's lost because I gave it away. Because joy is a choice. I choose to trust in the Lord and to be joyful, or else I give my joy away because I don't want to trust in Him. Here, the people are filled with self-confidence. Now, how do we know that? Well, notice what happens. Let me point something out that's missing here. Now, keep in mind that we went from chapter 6 right into chapter 7. The story just continues. We have not, and I can tell you, you'll find here that it's not in this chapter at all, but between chapter 6 and chapter 7, there is apparently there's no recording of it that Joshua ever stopped to seek the Lord concerning Ai. He got excited with Jericho, and he said, we got to keep going. And he sent spies to Ai. Now what happened was, because he wasn't seeking the Lord, when the spies got back from Ai, instead of seeking the Lord and trusting the Lord, he trusted the spies. That's self-confidence. He was trusting his own leadership skills, his own ability, and so were the people. You must understand this. We're going to be learning quite a few biblical principles today. You must understand this, that a past victory is no guarantee of a present victory. I'll say it one more time. A past victory is no guarantee of a present victory. What do I mean by that? I mean that each challenge, each task, each hardship that I face, I must stop and seek the Lord at each step of the way. That's called walking by faith. Very simply, it's one step at a time. Lord, thank you for that great victory in Jericho. But now I'm heading to a different challenge, and Lord, I need your blessing again. Will you be with me? Will you bless me, please? Give me wisdom. Give me strength for this. I must find myself in constant dependence on and in God, in His abilities, in His resources, and not in my own. And the people here made a fatal mistake because they were trusting in their own abilities. And because of that, they paid a high price, in fact, the ultimate price. Self-confidence. It's dangerous. And you and I have got to be so very careful. In verse 5, we find out what this means, that they were running away. They ran, or what does it say? That they fled before the men of Ai. This is because they were struck down in verse 5. And the men of Ai struck down about 36 men. For they chased them from before the gate as far as Shebarim and struck them down on the descent. Therefore the hearts of the people melted and became like water. So 36 men were killed. Jericho, zero were killed of the Israelites. Get to Jericho, 36 people. Now, notice what happens in verses 6 through 9. Now, Joshua decides to do this. He decides to seek the Lord. It's a good thing to do. However, I think at this point we can all agree, probably should have done that before. But we see him here seeking the Lord. Verse 6, then Joshua tore his clothes. Okay, this was not like WWE or some Olympic runner ripping off his jersey. Okay, what this was, it was actually quite the opposite. It was a way for them, in fact, it was a common way for them to humble themselves or humiliate themselves before the Lord, tearing their clothes. Because, let's face it, today we go out and we buy clothes with holes in them. Okay, we buy clothes with holes in them. But you only want your clothes to be ripped so much. It's funny that we'll buy jeans with holes in them, but we never buy shirts with holes in them. Why is that? Isn't that funny? Because we've got we've got standards, right? And it's okay to have holes in our jeans, but not okay to have holes in the shirt, because the shirt, I mean, might show your belly buttons or something, and show the goodies or something, and you don't want to do that, But that's, if your shirt is ripped, that's kind of humiliating. You don't want to roll like that. You don't want to go anywhere like that. So you would change. Well, here, tearing the clothes was humbling themselves or humiliating themselves, because they looked ridiculous with torn clothes. But this was on purpose. So not only did he tear his clothes, but he fell to the earth on his face. That means that he fell not to the earth. It's not like he was hovering above the earth. It means that he was standing up. When he heard the news, he fell face down, face plant into the dirt. It says, and fell to the earth on his face before the ark of the Lord. You know what the ark of the Lord is, because you're all good students. You know that that's where the Lord would meet them. So he fell on his face before the ark of the Lord until evening, he and the elders of Israel. And they put dust on their heads. Why did they put dust on their heads? Because they were saying to the Lord, we're not even dirt, man. We're lower than the dirt. Even the dirt is above us. And so they were humbling themselves. But I want you to note something here right in the middle of verse 6. And fell to the earth on his face before the ark of the Lord until evening. Now, we do not know what time he started, but it is an indicator to us that there was a process of time. You see, sometimes I'm pointing that out because sometimes we're praying for something and we're upset with God because he didn't immediately give it to us. And it's like, Lord, come on, it's been 5 minutes. When are you going to give it to me? But Joshua, who would speak to God and God would speak back to him, it was a normal occurrence. Even Joshua had to wait and wait and wait until evening. And him and the elders, or the leaders of the people, laid there in the dirt, throwing dirt on their head, waiting for the Lord. Now, why does everything have to be a process with God? Because oftentimes what we're asking for, we are not ready to receive. You may be asking for $1 million, but there's a very good chance that you are not ready for $1 million. Now, you may one of these days be ready for $1 million, and God will give it to you. But right now, you're probably not ready for $1 million, because you might mishandle $1 million. You might get yourself in trouble with $1 million. And so oftentimes when we're asking for something, there's a process whereby God has to prepare us in order to receive that. And my guess, and it is just a guess, I'll be clear, that's just my guess, is that as Joshua and the elders are seeking the Lord finally, God makes them wait to get them to the point where their hearts are as low as they are going to get and their ears are as open as they are going to get. And then God can speak to them. But I want you to notice what Joshua does here. Verse 7, Joshua said, "Alas, Lord God, why have you brought this people over the Jordan at all, to deliver us into the hand of the Amaro, the Amorites, to destroy us? Oh, that we had been content and dwelt on the other side of the Jordan." Okay, let me tell you what Joshua was doing. He's on the ground and he's complaining to the Lord, and he's actually blaming what just happened on God. That's what's called a fit. Okay, you used to do that when you were little. You went to the store with your mom and you said, "Mom, please, I want this package of Twinkies." And she said no. And you fell on the floor and you kicked and you screamed. And you were blaming it on mom because she didn't buy you a package of Twinkies. Now, you probably do not remember doing that because she probably whipped your hind parts so that you never did it again. Or at least she should have. Because that's what I did to my kids when they did it. They learned early on, we don't do that, sucker. And they would get spanked for that. Joshua is on the ground, clothes are torn, throwing dirt on his head, and he begins to question God. Why did you even bring us over this Jordan? You should have just left us on the other side of the Jordan where we were happy. Now, do you think that God's going to put up with this? We'll see that in a little bit. But notice in verse 8, he continues on, "O Lord, what shall I say when Israel turns its back before its enemies. Now, I like this about Joshua. He says in verse 9, for the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land will hear it and surround us and cut off our name from the earth. Then what will you do for your great name? So Joshua actually says, listen, God, I'm concerned that your name is going to be dishonored. God, no one's going to be afraid of you after they hear this. They're not going to be afraid of you. And so he's concerned that the name of God is being dishonored. That's something that you and I should be concerned with before we sin. How is this going to affect me, the other people that are around me, but also how is this going to affect God's honor? Is God going to be honored by what I'm doing? Joshua was concerned about that. He had no idea that Achan had taken things. He didn't know. He thought this was all God's doing, which of course we'll find out it was quite contrary. But at this point, Joshua was saying, hey, I want your name to be honored. And that's a desire that you and I should have. Like, God, I want you to be honored through my life. Whatever I do, whatever I say, whatever I watch, whatever I listen to, whatever I show other people, wherever I go, whatever I post on my social media, God, I want you to be honored. So he's concerned about those things. Now, we find out God's response and the rest of this story in the third main division, which picks it up at verse 10, takes us down to verse 26. It says in verse 10, so the Lord said to Joshua, I like this with an exclamation mark, get up. Why do you lie thus on your face? What are you doing lying on your face? God is essentially starting out by telling him, this is not a time for lying around on your face. Get up. Israel, this is God continuing to talk here. Israel has sinned, and they have also transgressed my covenant. So, there is death coming. Why? Because there has been sin and transgression. Two different things. They are similar. They are related. But sin is what is called missing the mark. If you go out target shooting, target practice, you go out with your parents to go shooting. You're trying to hit a target, a can or metal, whatever it is. Or, archery, or even if you're trying to throw a little ball at a catcher's mitt or the first baseman, or you're trying to throw a ball through a net, through a hoop, whatever the target is, and you miss, and I miss often, okay? But you miss, that sin. You miss the mark, what you were aiming for. So God says, what you guys were aiming for, you totally missed. But then he also tells them that they're guilty in verse 11 of transgressing. Transgressing what? He says, and they have also transgressed my covenant, which I commanded them. In other words, the agreement that was made between God and the people, they violated that. They transgressed it. They trampled it. Stepped on it. And so God says, you're guilty for sin and transgression. He goes on to say in verse 11, for they have even taken of some of the accursed things, and have both stolen and deceived, and they have also put it among their own stuff. Now it becomes clear because God spells it out for them. We already knew because we found out in verse 1 that Achan had taken some of the accursed things. But Joshua was finding out for the first time. He says, they've taken some of the accursed things. Remember, cherem, which is also devoted things. They belong to God. He says they took of some of the accursed things. And, this is in addition to that, they have both stolen. So they stole things. Remember, Achan stole cherem, accursed things or devoted things. They were accursed because, hey, don't take those accursed things. But also, he stole from God. He stole from God. Something that belonged to God, he took. But also deceived. What do you mean he deceived? Yeah, he lied about it. So when he found the stuff, he put it in his backpack or his satchel or his bag or inside of his Jedi robe or whatever he had. And he put some gold and silver and some clothing in there, and he snuck off with it. He was hiding it. He was being deceptive. That's deception. And then he doesn't stop there. And they have also put it among their own stuff. Now, just a little weird thing about me, but for some reason, I like that God used the word stuff. Stuff. Okay? Anyways, they took it and they hid it among their own stuff. Now, I think it's important at the end of verse 11, and they have also put it among their own stuff. Who's they and their own stuff? I believe that we'll find out as we get further on into this. But let's read here in verse 12. So we saw sin and transgression. That's the problem. But now what? We need in verse 12, verses 12 through 26, we need a solution. What does this mean? Are we just done? We got to leave? What do we got to do? Verse 12. Therefore, the children of Israel could not stand. This is still God speaking. Therefore, the children of Israel could not stand before their enemies, but turned their backs before their enemies, because they have become doomed to destruction. Not good words that you want to hear from God. Doomed to destruction. Neither will I be with you anymore, God says, unless, we like that word, right? Don't you love when your parents go, you are never getting your phone back unless, and then you go, unless what? Immediately in your mind, you're like, unless, I'll do anything, name it. And they say, unless something, whatever they spell out the conditions. But you hear that word unless, and you're like, yes, there's hope. I love this from God. Neither will I be with you anymore unless you destroy the accursed from among you. Okay. So they've got to destroy the accursed. They got to get the sin out of the camp. They've got to get it out of their midst. How are they going to do that? Well, I'm glad that you asked, because in verses 13 and 14, he says the first thing you need to do is you need to expose the sin. Verse 13, he tells Joshua, get up. So evidently Joshua was still like in the dirt. He says, get up. Sanctify the people. Make them holy. Set them apart. In other words, prepare them. And say, sanctify yourselves for tomorrow. Because thus says the Lord God of Israel. There is an accursed thing in your midst, O Israel. You cannot stand before your enemies until you take away the accursed thing from among you. Interesting. He tells all the people, he's supposed to tell all the people, he does tell all the people, you need to prepare yourselves because tomorrow God's going to reveal the accursed thing. Now, it's just a thought. It doesn't say anything in here about this. But I wonder what Achan thought when he heard that announcement. Everybody would have heard it. Tomorrow, you got to prepare yourself because tomorrow we're going to reveal the accursed thing. Achan knows he's got it. And I think that might have been an opportunity for him to just grab the stuff, come out and just tell Joshua, it's me, I'm the problem, let's fix this. But Achan doesn't do that. He continues to try to hide it. It says in verse 14, in the morning, therefore, you shall be brought according to your tribes. And it shall be that the tribe which the Lord takes shall come according to families. And the family which the Lord takes shall come by households. And the household which the Lord takes shall come man by man. What does he mean? God is saying, listen, tomorrow we're going to gather everybody up. And then I'll reveal which tribe has the accursed thing. And we'll separate that tribe. And now we've got the one tribe. And then what we'll do from there is we'll go family by family. And then we'll go house by house. And then we'll go person by person until we find the accursed thing. And I wonder, it's just my own theory. I'm making that clear again. This is just my own thought. I think that what God was doing was going, hey, we're one step closer. You going to tell us, Achan? No? Okay. We're one step closer. You going to tell us, Achan? No? Okay. We're one step closer. Here we come. So I don't know what was going through Achan's mind other than, oh, man, I shouldn't have done this in the first place. I should just continue to hide it. You know how some people do that? Not you. But you know how some people do that? Like you realize, I shouldn't have done that. And then you're kind of like, man, does anybody know? And you know that you should reveal it, but you don't. And then it's like somebody gets a little bit closer to finding out it's you, and you're like, I should just say it, but you don't. And then somebody gets a little bit closer, you're like, and that's what Achan is doing here. And so, in verse 15, God's still giving instructions, says not only expose the problem, but you must eliminate the problem. Verse 15 says, then it shall be that he who is taken with the accursed thing shall be burned with fire. So whoever it was that took the accursed thing is going to be burned to death. Not light a match under their arm and put a burn mark on them. Burned to death. And I want you to note in verse 15, he and all that he has. Why? Because he has transgressed the covenant of the Lord, and because he has done a disgraceful thing in Israel. He brought shame on the Lord and on God's people. Verse 16 down to the bottom is simply the narrative of what happened. Let's read it. So Joshua rose early in the morning and brought Israel by their tribes, and the tribe of Judah was chosen. He brought the clan of Judah, and he took the family of the Zarhites from within that tribe of Judah. Once he got the Zarhites, he brought the family of the Zarhites person by person, and Zabdi was chosen. Verse 18, then he brought his household, Zabdi's household, person by person, and Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah of the tribe of Judah, was taken. Valuable lesson. God already knows what you've done. You cannot hide from him. It's silly to think that we can. And I said we, because sometimes I think I can. Look to the right, look to the left, look behind you, look ahead. Nobody's watching. You forgot to look up. God already knew. And so God knew exactly who it was. And in verse 19, it says, now Joshua said to Achan, my son, I beg you, give glory to the Lord God of Israel, and make confession to him, because confessing to God is always glorifying to God. Confession to God is always glorifying to God. And tell me now what you have done. Do not hide it from me. And Achan answered Joshua and said, indeed, I have sinned against the Lord God of Israel, and this is what I have done. When I saw, see there? So many of our problems begin with what we see. I saw something, I wanted it. When I saw among the spoils a beautiful Babylonian garment, 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold weighing 50 shekels. That'd be hard to ignore, wouldn't it? Be hard to ignore. He says, I coveted them. He coveted them because he first saw them. That's where so many of our problems start. I coveted them and took them. And there they are, hidden in the earth, that means in the ground, in the midst of my tent with the silver under it. And so the items were hidden inside of his tent, under his tent, in the dirt. And they took them, in verse 23, from the midst of the tent. Verse 22. So Joshua sent messengers, and they ran to the tent, and there it was, hidden in his tent with the silver under it. And they took them from the midst of the tent, brought them to Joshua and to all the children of Israel, and laid them out before the Lord. So they bring them back, and Achan's sin is laid out before the Lord and before Joshua and before all the children of Israel. Everybody saw what he had done at that point. Now I wonder if when he first heard that what was going to happen, if he would have just said, you know what, I'm going to Joshua right now. And I wonder if, had he just gone to Joshua at that moment, I wonder if it could have been just, something a little quieter. But now, because he tried to hide it, God kept revealing and revealing and revealing and peeling back all the layers until all of it was exposed. It is always, always, always best to just go to God as soon as humanly possible and just say to God, God, I have sinned, forgive me. Because God is ready to forgive. Anyhow, we move on in our story. And it says in verse 24, then Joshua and all Israel with him took Achan, the son of Zerah, the silver, the garment, the wedge of gold, his sons, his daughters, his oxen, his donkeys, his sheep, his tent, and all that he had, and they brought them to the valley of Achor. And Joshua said, why have you troubled us? The Lord will trouble you this day. So all Israel stoned him with stones. and they burned them with fire after they had stoned them with stones. Then they raised over him a great heap of stones, still there to this day. So the Lord turned from the fierceness of his anger. Therefore, the name of that place has been called the Valley of Achor to this day. So you and I read right. Achan died, but also his family and his animals and his tent and the items that were stolen. Everything was burned that day. Family was stoned to death. Everything was burned and totally destroyed. Why? Because he saw something that he wanted, he went and took it. It's the lust of the eyes. Saw it, lusted after it, went and took it, and thus lost everything. Everything. And his family lost their lives as a result of their leader's mistake, as a result of his sin, as a result of Achan's sin. It's a valuable lesson. When my kids were little and they would get a spanking, I would, if we were at home, and even if we were out, I would tell them, hey, you're going to get a spanking when we get home for acting like that. If you don't stop now, you're going to get it right now and when we get home. And so at home, what I would do is I would take them into the room because I did not need to, in most cases, sometimes they just got it right where they were at. But in most cases, I didn't need to humiliate them in front of the rest of the family. So I'd take them into the room, and that would give me the opportunity to sit down and talk to them about what they had done wrong. And I would explain to them that they had been disobedient. And I would explain to them, again, I'm a Bible teacher, okay? If your parent's not a Bible teacher, be glad, okay? But I'm a Bible teacher. So I would sit down and talk to them and say, listen, you're going to get a spanking because you did this, and it's called sin. I would explain that to my kids. And when it was time for the spanking, I would have them pull down their shorts or their pants, keep their underwear on. Again, I wasn't trying to, get them completely naked and just make it that much worse. But I would have them pull their shorts or their pants down, and then I would one time spank their bottom, just on the bottom. That's what it's made for. And I would spank them with my bare hand. I didn't use anything else. As long as they sat still, they would get just one. My daughter, Chloe, man, she was notorious for just dancing. And she'd be like, boom, she would just be like all over the place. And it was like, you got to hold still, okay? Because I kept catching like little pieces of the bottom, and I'm just going to keep going until I get a good one. You got to sit still. And she would just, boom, she'd be all over the place. But eventually she'd settle down, and then she'd get one on the bottom. And I just did one. And the reason that I would do it with my bare hand is because I would explain to my child, you must understand that you've been disobedient, you sinned. And here's the lesson. The lesson is sin never affects just you. And I would show them my hand. And it'd be a little bit red. Again, I wasn't beating my kids, but it would be a little bit red. And I would say, you felt the sting on your bottom, I felt the sting on my hand. So because of your sin, not only did your bottom sting, so did my hand. I had to suffer with you. And I would teach them that sin never affects just me. It always affects someone else. Achan learned a hard lesson. But so did the rest of the children of Israel that day. That sin never affects just one person. It always affects the other people around us. And in Achan's case, it affected the entire community, the children of Israel. Now, this is a point of contention as we close. Critics of the Bible oftentimes will point to this passage and go, look, here's God. He's unjust because he killed Achan and Achan's family along with him. See there? And in apologetics doesn't mean apologizing like I apologize for the Bible, but it means defending the Bible. Let me share 3 things with you as an answer to this. Why was this okay? Why is it okay for God to do this? Well, number 1, because God is the creator. He created Achan and his family. Now, if you're an artist and you paint a picture, or you work with ceramics, make something, it's yours. You can do with it as you please. Years ago, I used to paint, and there were times, oftentimes, when I would paint something, step back and look at it and go, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. And I would paint over it. It was mine. It was my creation. I could do with it as I please. Achan and Achan's family were God's. God could do with it as he pleases. He's the creator. He can do as he pleases with his creation. But secondly, Achan had sinned. Therefore, there was a price to be paid. He was deserving of punishment. You might think that was a harsh punishment. Do you think? Because that actually leads us to our third reason why this is okay. And that is because not only is God the creator, he can do as he pleases with his creation, but number two, Achan had sinned. He was deserving of death, or punishment at least. But Achan was responsible for the death of 36 soldiers. Because he decided to take clothing, silver and gold, 36 men lost their lives. Did those 36 men have wives or kids? Did they have a mom or a dad that was waiting for them to return from the battle? Did they have family members or friends or neighbors who were looking for them? And they never returned. They lost their lives out there at Ai. Who was supposed to pay for that? If I walk into the room today and I pull out a gun and I shoot 36 people, what should happen to me? One of two things. Either I should be locked up for the rest of my life or face the death penalty. That's what the majority of us in here believe. Not all of us probably believe that, but the majority of us, we go, man, no. And your mind might be changed if I kill one of your family members. Your standards might change. You might say, I didn't used to believe in the death penalty. Now I do. Kill this guy. If I kill 36 people, who's supposed to pay for that? Well, it was Achan's fault that 36 people died that day. And so he was responsible for the death of those soldiers, and thus he had to face that death penalty. Now, why his family? Why did his family have to die with him? Well, it's a very good possibility that they hid those things in their stuff. Remember that? There's a very good possibility that they hid those items in their stuff. The fact that he hid them in his tent, my guess, and it is just my guess, here I go again, giving my theory. My guess is that his family knew about it. And thus they were guilty also. And so God punished all of them, or judged all of them. It's a good reminder that we ought not ever be party to someone else's sin. We gotta remove ourselves from that, do our best to stop them or remove ourselves from that. Achan was responsible for the death of the soldiers, but not only the death of the soldiers, the fear that it caused all the people. You might remember verse 5. At the end of verse 5, it says, because the 36 men died, therefore the hearts of the people melted and became like water. In other words, Achan's sin, because of Achan's sin, it affected the rest of the people. It filled the rest of the people's hearts with fear. So he was deserving of death. This is what God had doled out to him, and it was accurate. It was fitting. It was right, because God had decided it. You and I must be careful that we are always seeking to honor the Lord, not operating in the lust of our eyes, looking at things and desiring those things, but always being content with what the Lord has given us. Always being content with the parameters that the Lord has set up. Always being extra careful to honor the Lord, being jealous and saying, you know what? When I say jealous, I mean jealous for God's honor. I want God to be honored in all that I do. If we can remember that before we sin, that will oftentimes stop us from sinning. If I can just remember that God needs to be honored through my life. As we finish, 3 C's of prayer. Conceive it in prayer, conduct it in prayer, conclude it in prayer. Joshua and the people forgot to conceive it in prayer. They went from one to the next. We got to seek God first at each step of the way. Conduct it in prayer. They didn't do that either. They just went on into the battle, never sought the Lord. They did conclude it in prayer, only after realizing that they should have conceived it in prayer and conducted it in prayer. Let's you and I remember that. I need to conceive it in prayer, whatever it is that I'm doing, conceive it in prayer, conduct it in prayer, conclude it in prayer. Father, thank you so much. And with that in mind,